Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session in the International Water Colloquium, which is jointly organized by TU Dresden, UNU-FLORES, and the University of Bonn. My name is Raghid, and I will be moderating this session alongside Christina. For those who couldn't attend last week's session, the topic climate change, capacity development and water management through research in Myanmar was presented. And you can see more details about that and about the upcoming sessions and our events webpage, which is shared in the chat right now. And coming back to today's session, the topic climate change, wash service provisioning, and the realization of human rights to water and sanitation in Ghana will be presented. For that, I would like to warmly welcome our panelists, Dr. Gerald Fourcourt, Research Fellow in Water and Land Studies at the United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources in Africa, and Dr. Daniel Nukpeza, Research Fellow in the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana. Before I hand over, I would kindly like to ask the participants to post their questions related to the content in the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will forward it to our panelists, and they will try to address it for sure. And any technical issue, you can just write it in the chat, and we will try to fix it as well. Yeah, now I would like to hand over to our panelist, Dr. Gerald. Please go ahead.
Hello, Rajit. Can I proceed now?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, please
Okay.
go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Accra. Thank you, Rajit. And good morning or good evening, depending on where you join us from. We're delighted that you've joined us today. My name is Gerald, and I work for the United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources in Africa. We are one of the about 14 institutes in the world. And I have to quickly add that we are the only UNU institute based in Africa, and our mandate is the management of the renewable and non-renewable resources of Africa. We are based at the University of Ghana, where we share the same building with our research collaborators, the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies, represented here by Dr. Daniel Nukpeza. So we're going to talk about WASH. And let me share my screen so that we can get started. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, you can.
Great. So we're going to talk about climate change, wash service provisioning, and the realization of human rights to water and sanitation in Ghana, enabling effective collaboration between research, private sector, and policy. I start with this slide. Because we are all fully aware that water is essential for life. But there has never been a better time to talk about water, sanitation, and hygiene than this time, where we all find ourselves in the coronavirus pandemic, where water has become very, very essential for hand washing, which is one of the preventive measures for the coronavirus pandemic. So today we're going to talk about 4 things. The first is that we're going to look at international efforts that are being made to ensure that there is access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for all. And we're going to focus on the human rights to water and sanitation and the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll tell you a bit about that very soon. We're going to look at Ghana's commitment and where Ghana stands at the realization of this human rights to water and sanitation. Then we're going to see the potential impacts that climate change can have on this realization. And the 4th one, we're going to look at the collaborations that are needed to facilitate this realization. We're going to have some kind of presentation relay over here, because I'm going to start the presentation. Then at a point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Daniel, to continue. And then Daniel will later on hand over to me. to finish with the presentation. So stay with us. We should be over very, very soon. So let's start. You might have heard about the human rights to water and sanitation. This came into being in 2010. So this year is the 10th anniversary, and this is why you see this logo over here. And what are the principles of the human rights to water and sanitation? This is a UN resolution that acknowledged us living being has the right to that. And it's not only looking at availability of water, but it's also looking at whether it's affordable, whether it's accessible, whether it's acceptable culturally, and whether it is safe, which is very, very critical. But the other aspect of the human rights to water and sanitation is that it seeks to eliminate all forms of discrimination, whether be it on the basis of sex, or the fact that you're poor, vulnerable, aged, migrants, refugees. So there's this whole group of vulnerable and marginalized population that the human rights to water and sanitation seeks to prevent any discrimination against on the basis of who they are. And so if it's a human right, then everybody deserves to have this service. But before the human rights to water and sanitation, there were already global efforts that made references to human rights to water and sanitation. And here I talk about just about two of them. The first one is Habitat 2, which was the a UN conference on human settlements. And this recognized that everyone has the right to adequate living conditions or standard of living for themselves, for their families. And that includes food, water, shelter, sanitation, and everything. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was also in 2000, also alluded to the fact that everyone has the right to adequate living conditions, and that also included food, water, sanitation. So before human rights to water and sanitation, there were already some treaties that highlighted this, but it was not binding enough as the human rights to water and sanitation. And very soon I tell you some other additional resolutions that made it binding legally binding in international law. So that is the first international effort that I'd like to talk about, the human rights to water and sanitation. The second one, which many of us are aware of, is the Sustainable Development Goals. That was in 2015. And one of its central transformation or transformative principles is that we need not leave anyone behind. And leaving no one behind means that everyone should have access to this very basic good that everyone needs in life, that is water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. It also seeks to eliminate all forms of discrimination against marginalized and vulnerable people in assessing water, sanitation, and health. But more importantly with the SDGs is that SDG 6, which talks about clean water and sanitation, has huge synergies with a lot of the SDGs. And very soon we're going to tell you a bit about some of the synergies with the educational sector, but also with the food sector, with the health sector, and almost all the SDGs as you have seen listed on this slide. So that is the second international effort I would like to talk about. So there has been continuous and incremental global efforts to ensure access to water for all. And so where does Ghana stand? What has been Ghana's commitments to these international treaties? What are the stresses that could prevent Ghana from realizing these commitments? And what are the opportunities or what are the areas of concentration that could help us in realizing this human right to water and sanitation? So these were the study objectives as I've already indicated. So the first part would be to look at Ghana's commitment to this international treaties. And here I give you a quick overview of Ghana's commitments. In 1986 was the Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights. And this, although does not explicitly mention water and sanitation, also mentions the right to adequate standard of living. And so that has some essence or some aspects of water and sanitation in there. But the Habitat Agenda, which I've already mentioned, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights is also something that Ghana has committed to, signatory to. The Millennium Development Goals, Target 7.C, also made reference to water and sanitation, safe water and sanitation, which Ghana is also part of. Then the 2010 resolution, which Ghana actually ratified. But more importantly is that in 2011, there was an additional UN General Assembly resolution. And what this resolution sought to do was to reaffirm the resolution of 2010, but also extend it and say that this right to water and sanitation is derived from the right to adequate standard of living. So what that means is that if you take the Habitat and then the ICESCR, and it's talking about the right to adequate standard of living, inherent in that is the right to water and sanitation. Then in 2013, it even went further to reaffirm the resolution of 2010, but then extended it again and said that the human right to water and sanitation is actually legally binding in international law. And what that means is that if you do not have access to water, safe water and sanitation, there is some legal infraction over there for which you can seek redress. So that is how far Ghana has gone. And actually Ghana co-sponsored this 2013 resolution that actually shows Ghana's commitment at this international level. And of course, in 2015, Ghana was also part of the Sustainable Development Goals and actually reports on an annual basis based on the voluntary national reporting. So how has Ghana translated these international commitments into national frameworks, into national policies? What has been the progress so far? And that will be the essence of the next slide. I take only three. I look at the national constitution. I look at the national water policy, that is the current national water policy, and then a development plan. So the first one is the national constitution. And of course, the national constitution, as you can see, was in 1992, and it predates the human rights to water and sanitation, which was in 2010. But there are some references in the national constitution that are interesting and point to the human rights to water and sanitation. It talks first about the state shall promote just and reasonable access by all citizens to public facilities and services. And inherent in services are water and sanitation. So the Constitution of Ghana, although it predates the human rights to water and sanitation, actually makes some references to the principles of human rights to water and sanitation. The second one is the National Water Policy, which was originally in 2004, but revised in 2007 and currently under revision again. That also makes provision to make two references that are linked to the principles of the human rights to water and sanitation. First is to facilitate improving access to potable water without discrimination. And without discrimination is very, very important because the human rights of water and sanitation seeks to eliminate all forms of discrimination on the basis of whatever, be it gender, be it sexual orientation, be it whatever. So this actually speaks somehow to the human rights of water and sanitation. But the second one is enhance the management and development of water resources in a manner which, as first priority, safeguards that the entire population, particularly the poor and vulnerable, will have access to adequate and potable water. And that is also key for the human rights of water and sanitation because it seeks to bring everybody on board, also with the SDGs. I have to quickly say that there is emphasis on water over here. Both provisions are on water because this was the national water policy. And this is why probably you have not seen sanitation over here. But when we come to 2014, there was a water sector strategic development plan. And this had a very, very important provision, which seemed to have picked the principles of the human rights to water and sanitation. So it says it will make all people living in Ghana have access to adequate, safe, affordable, reliable, and sustainable water services. and practice safe sanitation and hygiene, and that water resources are sustainably managed. So when we take the national constitution, when we take the water policy, when we take the development plan, all of them make some references to the principles of human rights to water and sanitation. Now, let's go to the ground. How has this translated to the ground? What are the numbers looking at? How many people do have access to safe water and sanitation, or safely managed water and sanitation, based on Ghana's voluntary reporting? So on this slide, I provide two graphs, but then you see this percentage. This is coming from Ghana's voluntary national report. These are reviews that countries are subject to. They do these reviews to show the progress that they're making in the implementation of sustainable development goals. And this is normally the basis of the review at the higher level political forum, which is held under the auspices of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. And here you see that the proportion of population using improved drinking water sources in Ghana is 44%. There has been some tremendous improvement from 1999 to 2017. You can see that there's been a huge jump, the national average from 16.3 to 37.3 between 2006 and 2013, and then also up to 44.3. But you see huge disparities between urban and rural, although the increment between the rural and urban between 2013 and 2017 seemed to be a bit higher for the rural side. I'm talking about the graph, which is on my right. It depends on where you are. So I'm looking at these. So although the national average is 44, when you look at the rural, it's just less than half of that. Although there seemed to be some improvement in the rural compared to the urban. But when we move to sanitation, the picture is a bit different, because the proportion of population with access to basic sanitation services is 21%. And that is again half of the figure that we have for safe water. And here you see on the left some very, very interesting statistics over here, because when you look at the urban areas and you look at the these blue bars, you realize that open defecation between 2015 and 2017 actually increased in terms of percentage. There is a number of people who are using open defecation as their form of sanitation, actually increased between 2015 to 2017, and that is quite interesting. For rural areas, there was no change, but then for the national average, you see that there's again an increase between 2015 and 2017, and that was about 18.7 to 22. The national average is now 20%, but the three northern regions alone account for about 70%. And I have to quickly add that Ghana's three northern regions are no longer three. There's been some subdivisions, but at least these statistics were given at a time where the regions were 10. And it's a whooping 70%. And that shows that although the progress with water has not been so great, the progress of sanitation has been really very difficult. And open defecation is actually on the increase. Whilst the basic sanitation, which is actually having a toilet facility in-house that you are able to access with washing facilities, is only 21% nationwide. Despite these low figures, there are still challenges with the service. So it means those who form part of the 44% still have challenges with the service that they receive from the service companies. And here, I give you about 4 pictures, two related mainly to the urban areas. And this picture with yellow gallons and this picture are quite similar, and they are very often in the urban areas because of supply rationing. The supply rationing could come as a result of low pressure, or maybe repair works in the treatment plants of the Ghana Water Company, or any other reason. So Those who have access to water don't always have access to water because of rationing. But in the northern region, or in the northern regions where piped water is really not as wide as in the urban areas in southern Ghana, there are boreholes. But there too, there are problems with the boreholes because you could have broken boreholes, but you could also have fluoride-infested boreholes. So although the percentage is quite low, there is also some service challenges. On the sanitation side, you see that I've already mentioned open defecation, but we also have the issue of oversubscribed community facilities. And here you see people queuing for community facilities, which is also a common thing that you see either in the rural areas or even in the vulnerable areas in the urban areas. And this picture also talks about safety and privacy, which is also a big issue. So the picture is not all that good despite all the commitments. But this last slide, after which I would hand over to Daniel to come in with the climate change angle, is on COVID. And I could not finish this aspect without talking about COVID, because COVID-19 has water or hand washing as one of the principal measures to the prevention of COVID. And the government of Ghana had a brilliant idea to absorb all water bills for all Ghanaians for the next 3 months. And this was extended actually as I still speak. And also organize all water tankers to provide water to vulnerable communities. And that was a good idea. And I have to admit that the government has done pretty well. But most people who benefited are those in the formal settlements, because those who have piped access are the ones who would have to pay, and those in vulnerable communities, the informal settlements, would have to go in search of water. And so if the private water tankers are not getting there, they have serious challenges. And so there are service challenges, but COVID has also brought out the huge inequalities in terms of economic status, whether you are in a formal settlement, you are in an informal settlement, to the whole aspect of provision of water, sanitation and hygiene facilities. And this speaks to the core of the human right aspect, whether people are really realizing that human right or not. That is not all the challenges that we have. Climate change is around the corner. And I'm going to leave you to Dr. Nukwaza for him to talk through about some of the challenges that climate change poses. He's going to take it from the national angle and then zoom down to local angle where we assess the impact of climate change on wash provisioning in basic schools. And then after that, I'll come back and talk about some of the collaborations that are supposed to be made to improve and facilitate the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. So Daniel, if you are there, please take over.
Thank you, Gerald, for the presentation thus far. Thank you for giving us the international perspective and the national commitments. In spite of all that, we still have severe challenges, especially when it comes to climate change. And climate change has exacerbated the issues of sanitation and water resources. For example, we know that sea level rise is resulting in seawater intrusion, saltwater intrusion in coastal areas, and flooding, and that in itself affects, contaminate water bodies, and that results in people having diarrhea and several other diseases. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes. So in this slide, we want to discuss how climate change has impacted infrastructure and water supply in general. Climate change has led to a situation where we have water rationing due to low dam levels. So you can see the picture on the bottom. Yeah, that's the picture that is being shown. It shows you the fact that we have very low levels in our dams. And when that happens, that will mean that we will have scarcity of water, and scarcity of water means we'll have to ration water. And when that happens, then that would mean that water availability for several other uses, including water sanitation and hygiene, may be compromised or may be reduced. We also have a situation in which we have low groundwater levels and supply challenges. And that is due to the fact that we do not have a lot of groundwater recharge. So when we don't have groundwater recharge, that means that the quantity of water available will also be low. There are situations of drying of rivers and worsening of water quality. When you have increased evaporation and evapotranspiration, we have the water level being very concentrated, and the situation of eutrophication could set in. And the picture at the top depicts how we have infrastructure being flooded, and that comes from the Brongahafo region in Ghana. And on the top right, that is a toilet facility with flooding in the area. And we will all agree that that will be a recipe for the transfer of diseases. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so in this slide, we are interested to talk about climate change impacts within the educational sector. The fact is that many of the facilities are not robust enough, or in other words, they are not resilient enough. And when you have facilities that are not resilient enough, they are very much prone to flooding. So these are pictures that we got from the field. On the top left, that is a tippy tap system that is being used by a school. But on the bottom right, that is a school toilet facility that is broken. And actually the wall is broken. The toilet facility is supposed to have different toilets between males and females. But because it is broken, access is affected. And what happens is that many of the school children would use the bush. And when you have that, that will also mean that you are promoting the transfer of diseases. And lack of adequate hygiene facility is a problem. And that is a problem, especially among girls, in spite of the commitment that have been made at the national level and then the international perspective that has been given. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Before that, we can also talk about fecal sludge. And when we have flooding situation, we have contamination of surface waters, and that in itself can result in dire consequences. Now, in the next slide, we actually did a case study, and here we are zeroing in on a very local situation. And we are looking at wash in basic schools in the Keta municipality. Keta is found, the municipality is found on the eastern coast of Ghana. And this municipality itself, from the map, you can actually see that the area very close to the bottom of the map is just a strip of land that is between the sea and then the lagoon. So you can see that they are very much exposed to the vagaries of climate change impact. And in this very study, what we did was to look at how climate change has impacted wash provisioning in basic schools. And also try to answer the question, how resilient are wash infrastructure to climate change impact? And what would that lead us to? In other words, what are the opportunities in terms of designing alternatives that will turn climate change risk into opportunities? So in the map there are about several schools, at least about 10 schools, that some are located in the northern parts of the area and some very much along the coast. And I have to say that the area is prone to climate-related hazards, especially flooding and sea level rise. Actually, in that area, the highest point is 53 meters above sea level, and that's in the northern part. And the area is generally very flat. And because of the sea and then the lagoon, you can tell that the case of flooding is something that can happen very easily. And actually, the truth is that the area is also prone to erosion, and then the seawater is actually migrating inland. That has been the projection that have been shown. So that means that the wash facilities are actually under stress to some of the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So what we did was to engage with students and teachers, and our interest here was to look at climate resilience of the wash infrastructures. So we visited many of the schools, and the picture on the bottom is showing an interaction with a head teacher of one of the schools. And we distributed questionnaire. We also had interaction with the teachers, and also based on observations, we actually did this study based on all that. So what we did, one was that we used a 7-point Likert scale, and we tried to look at what how the facilities are resilient to climate change. And some of the key indicators that we used was the material for construction, the school's access to water infrastructure, the location. And the location here is important because if a school is located on a highland, chances are that they will not be exposed to flooding and the consequences of flooding. So the basic model that you see there, we developed what we call a flood resilient perception index. And basically the S1, S2 that you see is the score for the Likert indicators. So we asked respondents to rank on a scale 1 to 7, how they will rate those key indicators, or how they will rate the wash facilities based on the indicators. Would they agree, for example, that it's on a highland? Would they give the maximum score for the construction that is used in building, and several other indicators? So in all, we had 11 indicators. But we did not only do this assessment, but we also made an assessment based on observation. And the next slide will tell us about that. So this is a way to validate or triangulate our data based on the quantitative model that we developed. So what we did here was to use a color code, and the color code red, green, and yellow to assess the resilience or robustness of the facilities. And for the toilet facilities, we look at the material that is used for construction and then the location. So in assessing the facilities as green, we were interested in materials that were made of concrete with no cracks in the building, and then we can observe the robustness in terms of the strength. Is it located on high grounds? So those were some of the things that went into the decision. And then for yellow is the material that is made of concrete, and sometimes you observe crack lines in the building. It is located on flat or on low ground. And for materials that were assessed as very low in terms of their resilience, we're looking at facilities that were located in marshy areas, or whether the material was made with thatched and plant leaves, or maybe concrete but has extensive cracks. And the hygiene system, whether we were interested in the material that was used for the Veronica buckets, and then the description, is it made of galvanized metal? Is a tippy tap made of metal or strong stick? And then in assessing as yellow, is a Veronica bucket made of plastic material. So those were some of the guidelines that informed our evaluation. And actually it was based on consensus, discussion and consensus in ranking these facilities. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we report on some of the findings. So it is instructive to note that only 34% of respondents, for example, had access to adequate and regular supply of drinking water. Gerald had already mentioned the human rights dimension of this, but it's interesting to see that that is what it is in the schools. And we have 66% of the respondents who said drinking water provision in school was inadequate and it was not regularly provided. However, availability of water storage tanks in some schools improved access to water. And this tank that you see on the right is a tank that we located in the northern part of the municipality, where they use a rainwater harvesting system to store water for usage. And that will be some of the innovations at the local level in order to have water available for the peoples. Next slide, please. So here we report on the access to adequate sanitation and hygiene facilities. And in terms of the adequacy of toilet and hygiene facilities, although 84% said yes, they thought that they have adequate facilities, 16% said no. But that's just about the adequacy of the facilities. But in terms of usage, many of them did not use the facilities because the facilities were either in very bad states or there were crack lines in some of the facilities. And many of the students would then prefer going to defecate in the bush. And the graph on the right tells us measures that students were likely to undertake in the event that there was flooding. And some said they will go home. In terms of the percentage, about 28% said they will go home to use the toilets. But then we have a sizable proportion, about 15%, saying that they would go and defecate in the bush. And many will actually use blocks, cement blocks, put them in the water and walk on it to use the facilities. And this actually shows that there is really an issue with that. The picture on the bottom left illustrates, that is actually a urinal in one of the schools, but that's like a worst case scenario. But that just to make the point that this is supposed to be a urinal, and we can see the structure, the material that is used. It's supposed to be a girls' urinal, and the girls don't use this. They will rather go to the bush, or those who were a little bit shy will sometimes not come to school because they felt uncomfortable. So there are still issues on the ground when it comes to sanitation and hygiene issues, and this is exacerbated by climate change situation and other factors as well. On the right, we see the toilet hole, and the case here is that the toilet hole is low-lying and it is not elevated. Because of that, when there is flooding, access to it becomes difficult, and based on that, the students don't use that at all. The next slide. Yeah, so in this slide, we report on the climate resilience of water infrastructure, the indices that we developed. Actually, the flood resilient perception index, we are showing that for only 3 of the schools here that we found. You realize that it ranged between 0.51 and to 0.77. Actually, the maximum score for the index is 1. And these are some of the schools that had better facilities. And on the left, it showed you what we did based on observation, and then we used guidelines to assess that. So the red shows you that those are the facilities. The one on the extreme right, the facilities that were really not in very good shape. And it tells you that for that particular school, you can see how the red runs through. That means that the facilities are not robust enough. And those that are yellow are medium in terms of our assessment, and those that are green are those that we could rate as having high resilience. So the points can still be emphasized, can still be made that we still have challenges when it comes to sanitation and water availability in the schools. The next slide, I believe. Yeah, so this will be my final slide, and then Gerald will take over. We wanted to find out from the people themselves what they thought were ways to improve wash facilities in the schools. And it is instructive that about 83% of them felt that they had to be provided with adequate soaps, sanitizer, detergent, and brushes for cleaning, whilst we had just 18% saying that they will need to be provided with WC. So that means that the challenge is very basic, and that has to be addressed, and there has to be new ways or innovative solutions to solving some of these problems. At this point, I will hand over to Gerald to finish up with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you very much for staying with us. I think that we have provided some overview of the challenges that are available. We have seen the huge commitments at the international level, some level of commitment at the national level, but some very serious challenges in terms of providing the access to save sufficient, adequate water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. So what are some of the collaborations, or where are we supposed to put our investments? And in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to run you through some 3 ideas from us where we feel that there should be some effort in these areas. So the first one, we talk about the awareness creation. Awareness creation is making people aware of the human rights to water and sanitation, both duty bearers, that is government agencies, institutions, as well as those who hold the rights, the vulnerable and marginalized population. And there's a need to empower them, women empowerment especially, and participation, as well as a stronger integration of the human rights to water and sanitation principles in legislations, policies, and development plans. The second one is to talk about climate innovation and technology, which is very critical to reduce the impact of climate change, because climate is going to stay with us, and it's important that we adapt through innovation and technology. Now, the third one is innovative and sustainable financing mechanisms. And here on this right, you see these three boxes, and we feel that there are three communities that needs to work closer together to facilitate the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. The first one, we talk about the research community, and the research community includes the universities, the national and international research centers, as well as the United Nations country teams. The research community is needed to spearhead evidence-based policies, evidence-based research, which will inform policy, provision of technical capacity, and this is very, very important. But the research community cannot function without the enabling environment from the policymakers, as well as the financing that is supposed to go into research, either from the financial institutions or from private sector, indigenous private sector, foreign private sector, as well as businesses. The second community is the financial sector itself. They would need the research and the policy communities to be able to identify areas that they can provide support for. And the policy community, the ministries, the government institutions, the regulatory agencies also need support from the finance institutions, from the business community, as well as from the research community. And so these three communities, we believe, need to work strongly together. And in most of the examples I'm going to give, I'm going to try to identify where the collaboration actually comes in. So the first one, we talk about awareness, empowerment, and integration. And I've already hinted that a lot of rights holders are not aware of the human rights to water and sanitation. Some people in the ministries may have an idea of it, but that aspect of it being legally binding in international law is still not out there. And those who hold the rights, knowing this and knowing that there are avenues to seek redress, would actually push government to up its game. Of course, governments and all other stakeholders. So there is a need for increased awareness creation on the human rights of water and sanitation. There is also the need to increase pro-poor, and pro-poor policies that seek to leave no one behind. So if you take Ghana's water policy, which is being revised, for example, there are some references over there, but there are no specifics as to what exactly government seeks to do to reach the poor. And in other countries where we have reviewed the status of human rights, water and sanitation, there are actually specific pro-poor policies. And I think that going forward, the policy community, with the help of the research and financial community, need to identify specific policies to reach those who are being left behind. The third one is to get legislation that discourages discrimination. And there should be that strong legislation that somebody is able to seek redress and get that redress actually being addressed. And it seems that so far there is not that strong legislative, backing for that. And so for Ghana and many other developing countries, there should be some emphasis on that. And then the final one, which is very, very important, is human and technical capacity. And I emphasize over here on local level, because in Ghana, there's a decentralization system where the metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies are the implementers of most of the policies. But we have been running a top-down approach. And so most of the time, the MMDAs do not have the capacity, and especially when you look at the rural areas, to implement this. And so there's a need for the research community to increase effort with support from the policy community to provide stronger human resources, but also technical capacity for the implementation of most national level policies. The next one is monitoring frameworks, because if you do not have frameworks that have vulnerable or HRWS specific indicators that are letting us know that we are making progress with respect to vulnerable groups, it is difficult for us to measure the progress that we are making in terms of human rights to water and sanitation. So the Sustainable Development Goals actually reports on a bulk figure, but there are no specifics as in the level of access by vulnerable groups. And that would be dependent on the databases that we have. Our census, our national censuses should have indicators in there that are specific to left behind groups or vulnerable groups. And that can help in integrating that into our monitoring frameworks so that we'll be able to measure the progress that we are making in terms of providing water, safe water and sanitation and hygiene facilities to the vulnerable. And here we actually stress on the vulnerable because they are the ones who are being left behind. They are the ones who are in the informal settlements and all that. So this has to also follow the human rights-based approach to data, which was developed by the Office of the High Commission on Human Rights, which I provided over here. So awareness creation, empowerment, and integration, strong integration of human rights principles is very, very key. And that would have to be based on the collaboration of the research, the finance, and the policy communities in providing the direction for civil society organizations and others to join in facilitating human rights to water and sanitation. The second one, which is very, very dear to my heart, is climate innovation and technology. And luckily, we have quite a number of climate innovation centers that have been set up by the Climate Technology Program. At least in Africa, we have in South Africa, we have in Kenya, we have in Ethiopia, and we have in Ghana. And Ghana is the Ghana Innovation Climate Center, which we, the United Nations University, were part implementers of. And we also collaborated with the Institute for Environment and Sanitary Studies in doing the work that my brother or my colleague Dan just presented. So there is a lot that can be done in terms of innovation and coming out with innovative solutions to provide water and sanitation to the vulnerable. Now, we had the opportunity of interacting with a lot of young entrepreneurs on some of the challenges that they face. And three cardinal challenges that we identified was lack of research capacity. A lot of these young innovators who are experimenting with so many things do not have that research capacity. There is the need for them to collaborate with national and international research institutions that can help them in scaling up their technologies. There's also inadequate financing. Many of them are very, very young. They are starters. They do not have that financial capacity. And so they need support from there. And then unfriendly policy and regulatory environment is also a big challenge. And that is the work stream that UNU-INRA actually focused on. So here we still reiterate the importance of collaboration between the research, policy, and business communities. Which areas are young Africans exploring, and which areas are very, very critical for wash service provisioning? Here we retail about 4 of them. The first one is rainwater harvesting, but rainwater harvesting, that is not just harvesting water that is not safe, but water that could be treated and have an integrated lifting devices or lifting technologies that can provide water in the house. And this could actually go a long way if it's affordable and accessible, would go a long way to improve, water access in the urban areas, also in the rural areas, because all of us have roofs that we are sleeping under. And in-house toilet solutions, wastewater recycling, public hand washing, services or technologies are very, very key. And in all these areas, you can identify where the research community comes in, because the research community is needed to advance cutting-edge research on this and come out with new technologies You see where the finance committee is, where they provide the financing, especially for scaling some of these technologies. And we see where the policy environment comes in, coming out with incentives for young entrepreneurs to be able to scale up. And when you look at this website, you can find a lot of brilliant ideas that need this kind of collaboration to be able to scale up and improve access. The third one, which brings my talk to a close, is innovative and sustainable financing. And here I give you some statistics that is quite striking, because it has been estimated that annual funding requirement for SDG 6 implementation in developing countries is about 114 billion, which is about 3 times the current investment. So it means that we are about 2/3 short. And this requirement is not just for it's only for the infrastructure development and not for maintenance. So it means that there is additional financing that is needed to maintain whatever infrastructure that will be developed, whatever technologies that will be developed. Unfortunately, a lot of the pro-poor investments or interventions in Ghana have been donor-driven. Currently, there is the GAMA, which is the Greater Accra Metropolitan Area Sanitation and Water Project, which has done a great job because it had focus on urban poor, that is informal settlements, both in Accra and in Kumasi, and it's built, quite a lot of toilets. But these are all donor-driven. The UNICEF has also piloted its community-led total sanitation in the northern part of Ghana. And although open defecation is still widespread, there's been tremendous improvement over there. But there is the need to still think through and provide direction on how we can get more financing to provide wash facilities. And here we provide some few ideas that there should be you should think through leveraging public and donor financing to catalyze private investment. I think that private sector has been doing their bit, but private sector can improve on its participation, especially when there is some kind of base that is coming from public financing and donor financing, so that can catalyze private sector financing, especially from banks and other financial institutions. But there's also an innovative, way that the government's duty bearers can look at tax waivers, tax policies, very innovative tax policies that can actually release monies that can go into financing WASH projects. But WASH is not only about water and sanitation. There's also the housing component, there is the education component, there is the health component. And it's very, very important that all these ministries, these different sectors, come together and budget for human rights to water specific, make specific provisions in their budgetary allocations, which can be put together to provide financing. That is also an innovative way to look at that. And then the final one is international climate financing, which is available, but a lot of capacity is needed to support governments to assess some of this climate financing. And it's going to be very critical for innovation and technology, where a lot of young people will be able to assess this in scaling their technologies. So our 4-point conclusion slide is that despite the international and national commitments, Ghana is still a long way from realizing the human rights of water and sanitation. The percentages are not looking good, and I think that there's a need for huge investments in several areas. Creating awareness is very, very important. We need to let rights holders know about it, but also to let duty bearers know about it, so that they would be able to participate in policy and planning programs at the community level and at the local level, and let their voices be heard, so that access or that human rights that they have, especially for the rights groups, would be respected, and it can actually facilitate the realization of the human rights of water and sanitation. The third one, I've already mentioned, there's a need for huge investment in climate innovation and developing the kind of environment that would help for us to provide all the support that is needed in the housing, the education, the health, and all the other sectors that need WASH facilities. And the final one is a stronger collaboration between WASH stakeholders to create that enabling environment, especially from the governments, for developing and financing innovating WASH solutions. I would like to end by acknowledging colleagues at UNU-INRA who really helped and supported in putting this together. My colleague Rachel Akata really helped. Kondi Moyo, our director, Fatima Denton, thank you very much for your input and your support. From the IESSS side, thanks to Jijo, Yiren Chiteria, and Pearl Awudo, and the Climate Innovation Center, Ghana Climate Innovation Center, led by Rukaya Sanusi, Ahuma, and all the team. Thank you very much for the financing for the local level study that Dan presented. I think that it was great working on that. So thank you very much. I hope that we're not taking so much time. Over to you, Regit.
Yeah, thank you, Gerald, and thank you, Dan. That was indeed a very interesting presentation. Before I go to the specific questions from the audience, I would ask you two broad questions just for discussion. How can you sum up the main challenges and lessons learned from the collaboration work and the work with local communities? Maybe Dan can start with that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe I should start with the challenges in working with the communities in the school. I believe that the challenges are related to COVID-19. The field work that we did was supposed to be earlier this year, but we couldn't start all because of the COVID restrictions. But when we went to the field too, again, because of the COVID restriction, our sample size was not as big as we would want that to be. And secondly, our interactions were restricted to final year junior high school students because they were the only group allowed to be in school. That to some extent did not help us to see the different perspectives and the variability in terms of the responses that we would want to have. Nevertheless, after restrictions have been lifted or the restrictions have been, toned down a little bit, for want of a better word, we have visited the field again. So that would be in terms of the challenges, if we would say there are challenges. But in terms of cooperation between IESS and UNU, I think that it has helped us to build synergies, a so-called 2 + 2 = 5 effect. In other words, we're able to fill our strategic gaps and what we would have been able to do working in silos, we've been able to achieve greater when you add our individual efforts together than if we are doing our own thing individually. So that's what I want to say. Maybe Gerard has something to add.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, I think that from our side, also working with a lot of climate innovators, a lot of young entrepreneurs who are actually looking at water and sanitation technologies, novel technologies that are cheap for vulnerable communities, has also been an eye-opener, because it has actually helped us to see the real value in climate innovation, and also have helped us to see the potential that is there, especially among young Africans. There are a lot of creative ideas. Unfortunately, there is still the need for more support in terms of research, in terms of financing, in terms of policy environment. But then this has been a real eye-opener. It has shown the potential that is there. But the other thing that we have realized is that many of us in the cities also take water and sanitation for granted, because when you look at the rural areas and you look at the statistics, there is actually a lot that is going on over there. So I think it's been an eye opener, and a lot of lessons have been learned through this cooperation.
Yeah, thank you for your answers, and I would like to move to the audience questions. I was going to ask about opportunities, but you also mentioned it in some way. We can move now to the audience questions so that we don't let them wait a lot. The first one, actually from Professor Gunther, how do you measure climate resilience? Yeah.
I think I would hand that over to Dan.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question. let me say this with a caveat. Our work is still work in progress in terms of, talking about measuring climate resilience. But we can actually talk about indicators of resilience. Actually, when you go into the literature, that is one thing that, in terms of how to measure resilience. But in this work, we actually started by looking our point of departure or the point of reference for trying to do an assessment of resilience or the definition. So if you look at resilience as the ability of a system to resist, absorb, accommodate, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner. There are a lot of keywords in there. So first, we were interested in if you have a hazard situation or a disaster situation, let's say flooding. So of course, resilience is to a particular hazard. So let's say flooding. Our question to the questionnaire that we developed was one, how will the communities or the school be able to, bounce back immediately after, let's say, a hazard situation? And how will they bounce back in a timely fashion? So based on that, the indicators that we looked at, one has to do with, actually some work has been done when you take work that is done by, I believe the name is Tiene. They argue from systems thinking engineering perspective when they propose 4 indicators of resilience. They look at robustness, what they call rapidity in terms of being able to spring back or bounce back in a timely fashion. But we included 7 indicators in our report, and we are writing a paper on this and trying to make all the argument. And the argument that we make, we also took into consideration the vulnerability context. So for example, we argue that the assets like physical assets, natural capital and all that will actually have an impact on how a facility or a community is able to bounce back. And that is what led us to developing the model that we used in coming out with a flood resilience perception index. That's why we called it a perception index that we ranked. But like I said, it's still work under it's an ongoing work. It's still work under progress. But I appreciate the question.
Thank you. And maybe now a question for Gerald, I suppose. Beyond Ghana sponsoring and ratifying resolutions and capturing very convincing statements in our policies, it appears not much has happened in reality to effectively address HRWS. Is there anything noteworthy and holding up as a promising approach that needs to be supported?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for Dr. Ben Jampo. Ben is actually a former colleague of mine, and he's doing great work at KNUST. Thanks, Ben. Your observation is right. I think that there is a huge disconnect between the commitments and the implementation. I think that we can only advocate more, get stronger support to get our duty bearers, the government, to put more effort, more commitment into it. But then on one side, as I've spoken about climate innovation in technology, the private sector can do great job. In fact, there are a lot of young people who are now providing, affordable sanitation solutions for households. And many households are actually, if they have the assets, if they have the financial capacity, are willing to pay for these services so far as they are affordable. And I think that a lot of these private sector young entrepreneurs can actually provide these services when they get the kind of support which gives them that economy of scale, that they don't have to spend too much in production, but they have that initial investment that allows them to produce more or to give bigger services that makes it affordable for communities. So government is the principal stakeholder in this. Government is a duty bearer, that is true, and we need to push government. But I think that there should be some effort that goes into private sector entrepreneurship, where there is huge potential for upscale of innovative, affordable solutions. So that is what I would say.
Thank you, Gerald. The next question was addressed to Dan. In your own views, how do we strengthen wash systems in fragile communities?
Please, can you just repeat that again? Is that to me?
Yes, yeah. In your own view, how do we strengthen the wash systems in fragile communities?
Okay, how to strengthen the wash systems in communities. Actually, there are programs from, you know, the education ministry within the school context that aims to improve wash facilities. And what that program is doing is to provide the schools with some of those facilities. But I also think that, you know, at a local level, there are things that are being done by even the school children themselves that are things that are quite remarkable. So to improve wash facilities within those contexts, one, we need government efforts. I've alluded to that, but we also need the commitment by the school. So we have situations in which wash and sanitation in general, some of the schools themselves are, you know, they have programs in which the school children contribute a token to buy soap for the school or to buy gallons for Veronica buckets, and some are instituting their own source separation. So yes, we can have government commitment. There is also a space for even private sector players. And I believe that Gerard alluded to that during getting to the tail end of his presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer. And next, we have Maxwell asking that I'm considering the special needs of girls in schools and sanitation. I want to know if there is a conscious attempt by the government of Ghana to provide schoolgirls with adequate sanitation. Who would like to
Yes,
go
there is
ahead?
an effort, but I think that there is always more room for improvement. Actually, when you look at in schools, the Ghana Education Service, they have their strategic plan in when it comes to sanitation. There are the institutions, you know, that has been set up. So, for example, there was a target that they will be able to reach 100% of basic sanitation coverage in the schools by the year 2015. Actually, that has not been possible. But when you look at my presentation, it's interesting that you see a very marked difference between some of the schools that are enrolled on what we call the WASH programs. I believe that the challenge for government probably is finance. So some of the schools are enrolled in the former WASH program. And in terms of their performance when it comes to WASH, they were doing quite better than the other schools that were not on the WASH programs. So yes, government has made a commitment, but they've not been able to achieve their target.
And if I add, I think that one of the slides where we looked at the perspectives of students as to how WASH can be improved in schools, a huge percentage were actually talking about the provision of sanitary pads in toilets, and that actually speaks to the fact that there is a problem out there. And Ghana's reporting actually for the VNR has still not got indicators and reporting figures for hygiene. So I think that's another area that has to be looked at. And that gender aspect is huge, because when there are impacts on girls, especially on menstrual hygiene, that affects almost everything. It affects their productivity at school and how they carry themselves about, how they are able to understand what they are studying. So there is a huge aspect about it that I think that the duty bearers have not looked at very critically, because perhaps even the water and the sanitation facilities themselves are not there. And so I think we've not moved on yet to hygiene that sanitary or that hygiene aspect of it. Thank you.
Thank you again. Moving to another question, maybe a little related. How can we handle the traditional or cultural challenges? So there also might be other cultural challenges in Ghana associated to sanitation as well.
I think that it is through education, it's through awareness, because open defecation is one example, for example, where people feel that it is more comfortable using yourself either on the coast or in the bush. It is mean, if you have a toilet facility that has been flooded, then of course it is easy for you to go into the bush or go to the coast. So I think that a bit more awareness, a bit more education as to the need to look for better sanitation options is needed. But of course, when the sanitation situation is improved, then I think that many people are going to veer off or go away from these cultural norms, and then perhaps look for more sustainable ways of sanitation. I don't know whether Dan wants to add something to that.
I think that's fine. I'm fine.
Okay, and then moving to another question. There seems to be a strong link between urban development planning and HRWS, but not much is heard about an office such as the town and country planning in such disclosure. How is the town and country planning office departments or agencies are involved in addressing HRWS?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that there was a slide on institutions that we later had to take out because of the time, but there are institutions that are involved in this. So the Ministry of Water and Sanitation is the key ministry, but then housing is one affiliate ministry. Local government is another affiliate ministry. Education is affiliate ministry, health is an affiliate ministry, and then the town and country planning is actually part of the institutions that are involved. So they actually work with the MMDAs. The MMDAs are the Metropolitan, Municipal, and District Assemblies. So these are the local level assemblies, and so they are actually part of the work that is done at the local level. The problem, as I've indicated, is that we've always had a top-down approach where policies are made at the top and there are no clear implementation guidelines for local level implementation. And so a lot of these institutions do not have the capacity or are not capacitated to do that. So the structures exist. The town and country planning is actually part of that because they provide those facilities in the housing sector, which falls under the housing ministry. But that synergy has not been really realized because of lack of local capacity. There is some work that is being done, but I think that it's not up to scratch yet.
Okay, thank you, Gerald, again. And maybe the final question is a little general, but or maybe not the final question. I have something else. But you also mentioned about the COVID-19 and its relation or risks that it threatens the WASH services in the country as well. And yeah, how is the general? If you can tell us just briefly the general situation right now, as a from the inside, about the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, is this the question that it says, what is the current situation with COVID-19 in Ghana?
Yes.
Okay. I think that we actually had a very, very great situation some couple of weeks ago. So the numbers actually came down to about, I think, 300 active cases or so. But then the last couple of weeks, it has started rising again. I do not know the number that is at, but I think that it may be less than 1,000 or just above 1,000. And so public awareness has started again, and the government is making efforts. But compared to many European countries, as at least we have read, I think that Ghana's situation is quite stable, and we are hoping that it's going to come down. But the need for water, for that essential hand washing, is still a problem because there are a lot of informal communities that do not have access to water, and that effort to get private tankers to provide water, although I admit that there has been an effort there, is still really not there because a lot of communities still need to go and look for water. So there is that risk over there when it comes to that preventive measure. I don't know whether Dan wants to add something if you have recent figures.
Maybe except to add that in terms of fatalities, it's a little more than 300 people who have lost their lives to COVID thus far, as reported recently.
Yeah, thank you for the insights. And We got two more questions, which is is there any relationship between the standard of living of people and sanitation?
Dan, do you want to take that?
I think so. I think so. Of course, when, yes, I think so. And I can say that based on even things that I know. In some parts of Accra, a place like Alajo is a low-lying area. It's a marshy area. And sometimes you see people actually try to redeem their land or reclaim their land by actually, bringing in rubbish to their homes. And when you ask people, they say, well, they can't buy sand to reclaim their land. So I think that, for them, they feel that the area is flooded. Of course, this happened some years back that I observed, but I don't think that situation has changed. And I believe that if the people were in a position to, move from there, live somewhere else, or get sand rather, they would do that. So yes, I think there's a relationship between sanitation and people's standard of living and then their economic status.
Okay, thanks again. And we have also another question that we have seen from the observations that open defecation in the urban area is also high, and as we saw, it increased throughout some years. And how do you prepare to deal with this challenge?
Thank you very much for your question. I think that I touched on that briefly. There are actually two things that need to be done. The first is to improve on the access to sanitation facilities. Of course, when we provide sanitation facilities, when we facilitate the provision of sanitation facilities, then it's going to obviously reduce open defecation. People do open defecation because they do not have that facility, or it is not conducive to them, or there are some reasons. But then there are others that even when you give the sanitation facilities to, they will still prefer open defecation because it's a cultural thing. And there are many people who live along the coast who say that it is more enjoyable defecating along the coast. There are those who live close, in the peri-urban areas who would say that it's more enjoyable defecating in the bush. And so I think that there's a cultural side that requires increased education. So number one is for duty bearers to facilitate or improve sanitation facilities. But number two is also to provide, education, continuous awareness to this. And I'll say that the government has been trying, but there's a need for more effort.
Thank you very much. I think that wraps up questions from the audience until the moment. I would like to ask Christina if, maybe last question. Yeah, we can do as a last question. Improving the standards of living of the people and sanitation. Which of these comes first, do you think? That's on the last question.
That's a very, very tricky one. I think that we cannot do one and leave the other. They actually come in hand, because improving the standard of living includes provision of that essential good, which is water and sanitation. So if you remember when I talked about the Habitat 2 and then the Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights, it actually recognized the right of everyone to adequate standard of living. And that includes water and sanitation. So providing improved access to water and sanitation is part of improving standard of living. So we cannot do one and leave the other. Maybe what he wanted or she wanted to ask was maybe providing employment for people so that they have that economic power to afford these facilities. But that affordability is also inherent in the human rights to water and sanitation, that even when people are not able to afford, they are supposed to be provided that services. So in France, we have learned that in France, for example, the water company is barred actually by legislation from cutting water from households. So even if somebody cannot pay, the duty bearer is supposed to provide that water. So I think that they come hand in hand. Once you improve the standard of living, then the access to water and sanitation improves, and vice versa. I don't know whether Dan wants to add something.
I think so too.
Okay, then thank you both again. I would like to ask Christina if there is any questions from our audience from Facebook, or submitted any other question.
Yeah, we had a few followers on Facebook, but no direct question to you. But thanks for the presentation and the interesting dialogue. And I quite liked the last question to sum up everything. I just have another one to you both. What are the next steps in your project or in this collaboration?
Okay, thank you. The next steps, one, based on what we've done, we are still continuing trying to put together a paper. But we also think that there are opportunities in terms of looking at the situation among other vulnerable groups, like street hawkers and homeless people, for example, to look at what the situation is among this group, and that will serve as basis for informed or targeted intervention. So that is something that I believe we are both open to.
Yeah, just to add to that, because it seems that the indicators that government used to monitor do not have these vulnerable groups in there. So we do not know the level of access of many vulnerable groups to water and sanitation. And now that we have the general picture, we would like to dive a bit deeper and interview a lot of these vulnerable groups and get a sense of the access to water and sanitation and the peculiar challenges that they are facing, whether there are still discrimination as a result of their age, as a result of their sex, as a result of their sexual orientation. So I think that the next steps is to dive a bit deeper into the human rights issues and dive a bit deeper into the legislative environment as to how these can be strengthened to facilitate the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation.
Thank you again. Another question just popped up. I think we can spare maybe 2 minutes for that. Should water then continue to be free for domestic use in Ghana? That's also a view.
I do not know whether the water company will survive with that policy. I think that the government did very well by stepping in because of the COVID-19 situation. If I'm not wrong, I think that policy is still in force as of December, but I don't think that would be forever. I do not know whether this is the case, but there are tariffs. There are tariffs provisions for very vulnerable groups. In fact, the Gamma project that I mentioned is actually connecting people to the water network at half the price. And so there are some arrangements that are made to get vulnerable and less economically strong people access the good. But I think that having it free forever is something that would not work for the service agencies. There should be some kind of cost recovery.
Okay, yeah, indeed, the economic aspect is a very major part of sustainability to continue with the provisioning of water. So I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Gerald, Dr. Daniel, and thank all the attendees and the organizers for staying with us in this interactive session today. I hope everyone enjoyed it and benefited from it. I would like to show maybe an outlook for the next week's session, next Wednesday. Maybe Christina will share. Yes. We will have next topic the 2nd of December, assessing the enabling environment of SDG 6 with limited evidence through the SDG 6 policy support systems. And I hope we will meet again next week, and have a good rest of the weekend, everyone. And Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. Thank you to Christina and everybody. Thanks for having us.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.